Hello everyone and welcome back to the first game that finished from the round 3 of the Tata Steel Chess Tournament 2022. It's Jan-Krzysztof Duda versus Magnus Carlsen, and as you guys already know, Duda qualified for the next candidates tournament, so if he wins that, he might be challenging Magnus for the title if Magnus ever agrees to play for the title again, as he did say that he will only play Alireza for the title, but we'll see when it finally happens. Will that be the case? So Duda has the white pieces and he opens with e4. We have e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, we have bishop to b5 going for the Ruy Lopez, and now a6, Morphy's defense. And as you guys know, Magnus announced that he's going for that 2900 classical rating, which is incredibly difficult to achieve, and he will have to, continually just beat opponent after opponent, and very, very high rated opponents, because so far he drew one game and won one game, and he won like a point and a half. So it's not gonna be easy. So here a6, Morphy's defense. We have bishop to a4, knight to f6, and now we have castles. We have bishop to e7, and now rook to e1. So here b5, attacking the bishop to b3, and castles. And this is the position that we had in many games during Carlsen's World Chess Championship match with Yanni Pomnishi, where everyone was asking the question whether we'll see c3 and the d5, the martial attack on the board. That is, what we all want to see, but unfortunately we didn't see it, and we will not be seeing it this game. So here, usually nowadays players don't go for c3, they go for some sort of an anti-martial line with either h3 or a4. And in this game, we have a4. So going after that b5 pawn, we have rook to b8, and now a captures on b5. We have a captures, and now h3. We have d6, just continuing development, and this is pretty much following the game exactly from the Carlsen-Nepo World Chess Championship match, where, if you guys remember, in game 5, or rather in game 7, d3 was played, but here we have c3. It's a continuation. Nepo played against Magnus in game 5 of the World Chess Championship match, and we have b4. Magnus continues in the same fashion as he did against Nepo. d3, we have b captures on d3, b captures on c3, and now in the actual game, Magnus versus Nepo, d5 was played by Magnus, but here Magnus plays h6, and h6 is not a new move. Interestingly, Duda already had this exact same position, and he played h6, so Magnus here kind of plays the Duda's move against him, but only in that game knight b to d2 was played. But here we have after h6, we have bishop to e3, and this is now a new move. So already as of move 14, we have a completely new game. Magnus continues with rook to e8. He has h6, rook to e8, and now he's gonna bring the bishop over to f8. So if at some point you want to play d5, you will be able to, and the rook will nicely control the e file. So here, knight b to d2 and bishop to f8, and both players spent pretty much zero time. These were all instant moves, and this is the first time that Duda starts thinking, and he spent 30 minutes on his next move, deciding on whether to go for some maybe some bishop to c4, maybe some g4 advancements, or just queen to c2, nicely developing the queen and connecting the rook. So here, like I said, a 30-minute think, and Magnus pretty much instantly replied with bishop to e6, now offering a trade of bishops, plus you're putting a lot of pressure on this b3 bishop, so you have to be careful not to move the d2 knight, and there are a couple of ideas here that you could make. For example, you could play bishop to a4, just attack the knight here, and bishop d7. We might even see a repetition if this was played. Bishop e3, bishop e6, bishop a4, bishop to d7. Very likely we wouldn't, but it is possible. Another thing, after bishop to e6, you could play rook to a6 first, prepare bishop to a6, then it's going to be a double attack on the knight, but then we just see a trade. For example, captures, queen d7, connecting the rooks and defending the knight on c6. However, instead, after bishop to e6, Duda just trades. We have bishop captures, rook captures, and now strikes in the center with d4. So Duda is already down to 48 minutes on the clock, and this is the first time Magnus started thinking in the game, and after some time he went e captures on d4. Now, how do you continue here? Well, you could capture with the pawn, or you could capture with the knight. Capturing with the pawn isn't all that impressive, because there's this annoying knight to b4 move attacking the queen on c2, and after the queen moves, because you have to keep an eye on the e4 pawn, so you have to keep the queen on this diagonal, but also that's very annoying because the rook is on b8. But okay, if you move the knight and we move the queen, it's not a problem. Queen e8, we add a third attacker to the e4 pawn. Now we push e5, for example, captures, now knight fd5. So this is something that could happen, but this is black would very much enjoy playing this position. So instead, after this e captures on d4, Duda plays knight captures on d4. We have knight captures on d4, c captures, and now queen to e8. Now Magnus goes after the e4 pawn, and Duda plays d5 now. Chases away the rook, but also just, well, prepares the rook to a4. Then the e4 pawn will be nicely defended. So here we have rook back to e7, and now rook to a4. Duda defends the pawn here, and this is the only good way to defend the pawn. For example, if you move the bishop, yes, the rook now defends the pawn, but then you run into something like this, and the rook on e1, you cannot play this. So instead, after rook to e7, we have rook to a4, and now we have rook to b2, going for that very aggressive line with rook to b2. Rook to c8 is another way you could play this, just adding another defender here and trying to force c5, but I guess Magnus was trying to wait with this. For example, c1, we're going to push c5, d captures on c6, but this is now very well protected, and if you bring more defenders, we're going to bring, if you bring more attackers, we're going to bring more defenders, and now you have this funky position where some ideas like knight to d7 are possible, with the idea of shifting the knight to e5, going after the pawn here, and now we might even see just an all-out trade here. Just c captures, rook captures, d captures on e8, bringing a queen into the game. Rook captures on c1 with check, knight f1, rook captures on f1 with check, king f1, and rook captures on e8, and we would have this position where it's pretty much a completely equal endgame. That's why instead, after rook to a4, rook to b2 was played, trying to get the queen away from the defense of the rook on a4. This is how Magnus will further activate the queen, and the queen from a4 will also put pressure on e4, so that works out very well. So here queen captures, we have queen captures on a4, and now bishop to d4, putting pressure on the knight. So what do you play here? Magnus plays knight to h5, the knight is now coming to f4, and rook to a1, chasing away Carlsen's queen. We have queen back to d7, and now queen to c3. So Duda again wants to play rook to c1 and put pressure on that c7 pawn, and Magnus wants to play c5 at some point to create a pass pawn. It's either going to be a pass c pawn, or if d captures c6 en passant, then it's going to be a pass to d pawn. So here we have knight to f4 by Magnus, and now well, you have to be careful. If you play a rook to c1, then knight e2 with this beautiful fork, so you don't want this to happen. So instead, queen f3, attacking the knight, guarding the e2 square, knight back to g6. Here, Magnus did think about the position a little bit, because obviously you have to consider g5. It looks like it might be played if the knight can remain on f4, but we're just going to kick it away with g3, h4, and you've unnecessarily weakened your king's position. So instead, after queen f3, knight back to g6, and now rook to c1. We have queen to a4, going after the bishop here. The situation on the clock is 28 minutes for Duda and some 36 minutes for Magnus. We have queen d3, defending the bishop here, and now what do you play? Well, now the thing is, if Magnus goes c5 right now, then d captures on c6, and after rook to c7, going after the pawn, we're going to play queen c4, defend and offer a queen trade. Let's say captures, and now just knight e7 goes after the pawn here. For example, knight to f1, we're going to trade here, rook captures, knight captures, and it's, well, equal material, pretty much an equal endgame. So that's why after this queen to d3 move, Magnus plays f5. He wants to weaken white's center, and then at some point when the situation is just right, executed this c5 move, or maybe c6, depending on what will suit the position better. So here we have g3. Duda wants Magnus to capture on e4, so he can play knight captures on e4 and improve the position of his knight, and also this nicely controls the knight on g6. If you play f4 here, g4 is very nice, so Duda not worried about this. So Magnus just captures on e4, knight captures on e4, and now queen back to e8, putting pressure on this knight here. So knight back to c3, and now Magnus goes for rook to e1 with check. Rook captures, we have queen captures with check, king to g2, and now Carlsen's knight on g6 is hanging, so he needs to bring the queen back, queen to e8. And the situation on the clock is 15 minutes for Duda and some 30 minutes for Magnus. And here, Duda has to decide whether to go for something like h4 or wait or just do nothing. He decides to go for queen to b5. He still is trying to prevent Magnus from creating a pass pawn here. So queen to b5, and now Magnus declines the trade. He plays queen to c8, as Duda is very low on time, so it makes sense to keep the queens on the board, and now we're gonna play c5 at some point. We can't play it right away because d captures on c6 just has a protected pass pawn for white. So queen back to d3, going after the knight, and now knight to e7. We have queen to e4, and now finally Magnus creates a pass pawn with c6. We have d captures on c6, and here it was in this position on move 38 that the players actually agreed to a draw, as there doesn't seem to be anything that can be achieved by either side here. Point is, after the pawn is captured, we can just trade here. For example, captures, attack the bishop, bishop to e3, and we would get the exact same endgame that we already discussed, only maybe the bishop and knight are placed a little bit differently, where Magnus does have the passed d pawn, but still it's equal material. Here Duda has 3 against 2 on the king's side. It's a very unlikely that you would be able to do anything here. Duda is very low on time. He is below the 5-minute mark, but it's already they drew, I think, on move 36. Let me just check. No, actually on move 38, so Magnus couldn't really hope for anything, regarding time trouble. So yeah, that's the update on Carlsen's climb to the 2900 Elo mountain. Not going to be easy, as you've seen. Duda with the white pieces, he just has had no weaknesses whatsoever for the entire game. So Magnus will have to look for his chances with the white pieces. But still, if he can get draws with black, wins with white, could be that this will be a very successful event, as I imagine he will not be happy with the event, even if he wins it, if he loses rating. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It's the absolute first game that finished. All the other games are still going on, so I decided to make a video to briefly inform you on what happened. And if you guys have some of your own favorites, do suggest them. We're gonna cover them as well. So far, I believe the favorite, but it's still going on, is Dubo versus Vedit. So we'll see what happens in that one. So yeah, once again, hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Joseph Henderson, Frank Holmes, Jan Toplas, Richard Tavan, and Robert Jan-Krzysztof for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this wonderful event until it finishes. Thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.